Hello all, and today I'm going to teach you guys about the most optimal team comp and what that means in regards to the current meta, why the game is not being played to its fullest extent, and why the Chinese teams and Korean teams are doing so well, just in regards to how they pick team comps. I'm going to jump right into it. With the Season 3 changes, we saw a rise of bruisers, and what that means is bruisers became incredibly strong, mostly due to Black Cleaver and the buffs to Bloodthirster. We saw two significant buffs at the start of Season 3, and then people were like, oh hey, bruisers are really strong, let's start playing bruisers. So bruisers were the meta at the very start of the season. Then each patch after that we saw nerfs to the individual champions, and then nerfs to Bloodthirster, Black Cleaver, implementation of Seeker's Arm Guard, nerfs to Brutalizer, and nerfs to Red Pot. And what that means is, okay, Seeker's Arm Guard, that gave AP champions a way to counter bruisers during the laning phase. Previously, bruisers could just all in during the laning phase, and AP champions didn't really have a way to itemize early against bruisers to survive. Then we saw nerfs to Brutalizer. They nerfed Armor Pin on it, it further nerfs to bruisers. Then, most recently, Red Pot got nerfed, which was the all-in early game snowball potential that bruisers had. With all of that in mind, currently bruisers are not very strong compared to where they used to be. Now I'm not saying Kha'Zix and Zed are unplayable, I'm saying they're very strong, but how they fit into a team comp is not the most optimal right now. There are still ways around it, but I'm going to be very specific in this presentation to simplify it, because there are so many different ways you can play this game at the highest level, and the Chinese and Korean teams do think about these type of things. But I'm going to go specifically into how and why there's a certain way to play the champion composition to your advantage. And with the fall of bruisers, we see the rise of AP carries. And what that means is Seeker's Arm Guard came into existence. Seeker's Arm Guard gave a way for AP carries to counter bruisers in lane. Rabadon's Death Cap got buffed, which gave AP carries an even stronger late game. Even though it was only a slight tweak, it gave AP carries an even stronger mid and late game. Seraph's Embrace came into existence, which gives mana champions like Anivia and Karthus the ability to use their mana as a defensive option, and that's just a wonderful thing, because that, previously this item did not exist, and getting Archangels was just kind of like it didn't really fit into a lot of builds, but this item fits into so many builds because it's also a defensive item. Liandry's Torment gave the option for AP carries to counter tanks, and that's an excellent thing because that's just an extra way you can itemize to counter certain champions. With all of that in mind, right now AP champions are currently very strong. They can stand up the bruisers in lane, and they scale very well. So what if I could tell you that just by having a certain champion composition, you can make your AD carry stronger, you can make your towers more effective, and you can create even stronger jungle ganks, all through just champion team compositions. And you do that by forcing the enemy team to itemize for magic resist. Right now, the choices for magic resist are kind of poor. And, there are magic resist items that fit pretty well in some builds. Like as an AP champion mid, you can get Chalice, and it helps you farm and survive against some matchups. But looking at the whole picture and how an AD carry functions in the game, if you force your enemy team to itemize for magic resist, you're going to create something called itemization trapping. And what I mean by that is if you have a mid champion that's an AP and a top champion that's an AP, theoretically and hypothetically speaking, the enemy laners should pick up magic resist to survive in those matchups. Say you have a Karthus mid and a Rumble top. Let's say Renekton is laning against the Rumble. That Renekton should get magic resist to survive against Rumble because of how that matchup works. The enemy mid laner against Karthus might not necessarily have to get magic resist, but they're going to be encouraged to get magic resist due to the fact that two of the strongest mid game champions for that one team, Karthus and Rumble, they're going to be getting the most XP and hopefully the most gold. They're going to be the ones doing a lot of the damage mid game, so the enemy team should start itemizing for those two champions during the mid game. And what this does is, let's say, okay, the two champions that lane against Karthus and Rumble had to get magic resist during the laning phase. This is going to create an itemization trap because Karthus and Rumble are not going to be doing all of the damage for your team. If your team is well balanced and you have an AD carry that gets enough farm and you have a bruiser jungler that is a bruiser jungler, then you're going to create an itemization trap for the enemy team that's going to work so much in your favor once you start grouping up. And this is just a little bit more into itemization trapping. If the enemy team has to get magic resist, it means they're going to have less gold to spend on armor. And let's think about this as a whole. Okay, you're going to have an AD carry bot lane. So your AD carry transitioning to the mid and late game is going to be able to have, they're going to be able to do more damage to the enemy front line due to the fact that the enemy front line, hypothetically speaking, would have to get magic resist to counter the both of the AP solo laners. So your AD carry is going to be able to do more damage during the mid and late game team fights. Your bruiser jungler will do more damage when ganking the AP solo lanes because the enemy solo laners are going to be itemizing for magic resist. So a champion like Nocturne is going to be able to do more damage to a target that built a Hex Drinker than, say, a target that built a Seeker's Arm Guard. And finally, your towers are something that people don't really think about. If you're running a 5 AD team or something like that, then the enemy team can just get armor, and that means, oh hey, their towers get a lot weaker because they do less damage to us because we have armor. But if you're forcing the enemy team to get magic resist, your towers are going to do more damage to them. So let's jump right into this in a specific scenario. Let's say this is a mid-game team fight. Let's look directly at how itemization trapping can help an AD carry. In this particular scenario, this enemy team Renekton had to lane against a Rumble. And let's say he went a little bit overboard and bought Merc Treads, Hex Drinker, and Spirit Visage. He had a rough time during that laning phase. He's got a lot of magic resist, but very little armor. So this level 13 Renekton is trying to kill this level 10 Vayne because usually a bruiser is going to go for the AD carry because that's just pretty much how the standard goes. The bruiser goes for the AD carry because the AD carry is going to do a lot of damage, and unless the enemy AP carry can kill, their front line, then it's really hard for them to get to the AD carry. So in this particular scenario, this Vayne, they have both of these, this Renekton and Vayne have about equal gold. And because this Renekton had to itemize against Rumble, this Vayne's going to have a much better chance at kiting and killing this Renekton than he would if this Renekton went armor because he laned against a bruiser. And let's look at it as if this Renekton laned against a Jace instead of a Rumble. Jace top is a very common thing, but this is what happens as a result of running Jace top. During the mid-game team fight, they still have the same gold, they're still the same levels, but let's look at the different itemization that Renekton could go to itemize against Jace to help him in lane, help Renekton in lane against the Jace, and then how that transitions into mid and late game. So this Renekton can just stack straight armor because he doesn't really need to get magic resist to beat Jace because Jace doesn't do magic damage. So this Renekton has a Sunfire, a Warden's Mail, and Ninja Tabbies. This Vayne does not stand a chance during the mid-game team fights to survive against this Renekton unless she just has all the peel in the world. Because this Renekton has way too much armor for this Vayne to 1v1 this Renekton, and he can just face roll and kill this Vayne. Let's look at this from the standpoint of jungle ganks. Let's say blue team has a Rumble top lane and a Nocturne jungle. Purple team has a Renekton in top lane. Let's say this is a fairly early gank. It's like a 7-minute gank or so. This Rumble's level 7, this Renekton's level 7. This Nocturne just hit 6 and he's coming top. He's got, a Razor, Longsword, and boots. Well, this Renekton on his first buyback bought a Hex Drinker because he's thinking, this Rumble's giving me a hard time. I'm going to itemize against him because I want to kill him. Well, this Rumble went Seeker's Arm Guard because he's itemizing against this Renekton, which is an excellent item for itemizing against Renekton, and also gives Rumble the ability to itemize against the enemy AD carry into the mid-game team fight. So in this particular case, this Renekton doesn't have a whole lot of armor because he went Hex Drinker first item instead of being able to buy like a Chain Vest or something else because he's laning against the Rumble. So this Nocturne is going to get a lot of, plus bonus AD from his Q, and he's got a Longsword, and he might even have a little bit of AD from runes or something like that. So this gank is going to most likely equal in a kill for blue team because this Renekton, he's not itemizing against both the jungler and the top laner. And the result is there's a lot of diversified damage during the laning phase for the jungle ganks. So this jungle gank is probably going to end in a kill unless this Renekton somehow outplays them. let's look at it as if this is a weaker jungle gank. Let's say there's a blue team is instead blue team has a J-stop instead of a Rumble. These are very typical builds for all these champions in these particular matchups. Let's say this is a slightly later gank into the game. They're both solo laners level 9. Jace does primarily physical damage, and this Nocturne does primarily physical damage. So this Shin, by building or going towards building a Sunfire, he's able to itemize not only against the Jason lane, but against this Nocturne. So the result is, if Nocturne chooses to camp this Shin, then he's actually going to be hurting his entire team, because this gank on Shin is very likely not to result in a kill because of how Shin is able to itemize against both Jace and Nocturne. And I actually saw an NA LCS team do this in a scrim. And this one team's Nocturne just camped the Jace's lane and tried to kill Shin over and over again. And every single time I was just face palming, because this Shin was able to itemize against both Jace and Nocturne. And the result is, you know, he can't really die to that game. So what does this mean in regards to how Chinese and Korean teams pick their team comps? Now, Chinese and Korean teams, they understand itemization trapping, and they use a lot of variations on it. And it's really hard to go into specific details, because every team in those specific regions run kind of different variations of itemization trapping, and there are a lot of other factors that go into itemization trapping. One of the biggest things that I haven't really touched on in this presentation is 1v2 swapping, and that deserves a presentation in itself, because it's very complicated in terms of exactly what can go on. There are so many different choices the jungler can make, so many different choices that each team can make that affect exactly what happens. It's not like a very stale way the game progresses like it normally is, the way I described. You know, everyone's laning against their own counterparts, like top lane versus top lane, AD carry versus AD carry, and support versus support. Like that whole thing is kind of thrown out the window, and it's the whole idea of taking towers early, taking early objectives, ending laning phase early, not putting a purple side bot lane against a blue side bot lane with golem advantage. Like there are a lot of factors that go into that, but how this affects itemization trapping is it really kind of doesn't affect it very much. There are a lot of things that go into it. It's a different laning phase, but the main idea of itemization still stands. Because if you're running double AP carry, then that whole point stands. Like, the enemy team is still going to have to get magic resist. It's just the early point of the game is going to be a little bit different. It's a little bit more complicated in advance, but 1v2 swapping is very complicated, and it deserves its own presentation, like I said. But the main idea of itemization trapping still stands for a lot of strategies, and it's something that I feel like a lot of people don't really know about. So I hope this informed a lot of you guys, and if you found it entertaining / informative, then follow me on my YouTube page. Thanks, guys.